I want to play devil's advocate a bit, Dr. Donnelly, if you don't mind. Let me ask you, isn't there some truth to the fact that Aboriginal Australians or Indigenous Australians were the first people here, therefore have some fundamental right to the land or some superior right to the land than those who came after European settlement? These arguments have some merit in them, do you think, or none? Or is that unfair to say?
It's a difficult one. I mean, there are a couple of ways to answer that. The reality is, and this is a figure put by an Indigenous organisation, currently they have control or rights over 50% of Australia. So they already have up to 50% of Australia. And that's why they get royalties from mining. That's why if you want to go on the land, you need a permit if you're a white person. They also get over $30 billion a year in terms of government funding. They can vote. We have 11 members of Parliament in the Commonwealth Parliament who are Indigenous. They have equal rights in the law. They're citizens of a great nation with all those benefits, simply because they were the first, apparently, to come here all those years ago.
Well, we should point out also, I suppose, that they weren't, right? It was their ancestors, like our ancestors, who probably had all sorts of horrors and difficulties and tragedies and injustices of their own to deal with. I know mine did.
Well, they did. And the other point, and I've looked closely at the First Fleet, and if you look at the Admiralty orders to Captain Phillip, later Governor, he was told he must treat the natives, as they said back then, friendly. He must collaborate with them, cooperate with them. And he tried to do that. He was actually speared on one occasion and took no retribution. Now, that doesn't mean that things didn't go awry. I mean, when the Sydney or the First Fleet, when the original colony pushed out over the Blue Mountains, there were frontier wars and there were conflicts. There's no doubt about that, especially in Tasmania. But there's also the case that the Mile Creek Massacre, as it's called, where a number of white men were convicted of murder and hung. The reality is, it's not as black and white, if I can use that expression, as many of the activists make out today, what a friend of mine calls blacktivists. And as Douglas Murray said in his book, when does original sin stop? I mean, my wife's from England, Julia, she came out to Australia in 1952. Is she guilty of what happened in Australia in 1788? Are our children guilty? Are their children in generations to come still to be guilty? There's this whole victim mentality based on race, on identity, which I think has gone too far. And it's interesting, there are a number of Indigenous people in Australia, Jacinta Price, who's a senator, there's Warren Mundine, there are a number of them who are fighting against the referendum because they argue, in fact, a lot of Indigenous people became assimilated. A lot of them are mixed blood, even though they won't admit that. And a lot are happy and have succeeded in this society. A society, in fact, far better than what was here before European settlement, where if you read the history from anthropologists, Aboriginal society was very brutal, very harsh, especially for women.